I want to continue looking at what can go wrong with macarons or macarongs. And today we're going to specifically be focusing on what happens if you over macaronage or over mix when it comes to adding all the ingredients together in that kind of final mixing stage. So because I want to really focus on that, I'm going to make sure that everything else is perfect or as good as it can be. So as you see here, I've got all my ingredients. I'm using the French method, which is using room temperature egg whites. And as those are whipping, I will be streaming in the sugar mixed with a little bit of cream of tartar. I've got my almond flour and powdered sugar sifted and set aside. I have all the tools I prefer. I'm using just a bit of the powdered color from the Sugar Art, the Master Elites line. I will be using the 804 piping tip by Ateco, and I have a trusty brand of piping bags that I'm using as well, just a regular, because this is a small batch. I think it's a 16-inch that I'm using. Usually if I'm making a more normal size batch, I use a larger piping bag, but I know that these macarons are going to turn out wrong, so I'm going to make as small of a batch as I can while still really demonstrating the technique. Because I've gotten a lot of comments here and on my Instagram page of people wanting to see more about the meringue whipping process, especially the right way. And in this video, the macaron, everything except for that final macaronage is going to be standard, good, perfect. So this meringue, I am going to go to that really stiff peak. In my previous macarong video explanation kind of tutorials, I showed what happens if you under whip your meringue and what happens if you over whip your meringue. So today I want to show you a really good meringue. So if you do want to skip ahead, just warning you, I am showing the entire meringue process. My camera is just focused on that meringue. I do have a couple folks out there who want to bake along with me. I do not offer any live classes or things like that. So if you do want to have your phone or computer, whatever, YouTube up in the kitchen with you to see all of the steps, this is kind of for you guys. So if you want to skip ahead, feel free. So as we've explored before, macarons have so many variables. There are just so many things that go wrong. And as we saw with the over or under whipped meringue, a lot of those macarons were usable. They weren't completely ruined, but there were pretty large gaps. There were really fragile tops. They shattered pretty easily. And some of that, you know, if it was just a little bit not the best, but not terrible, you know, it would still be usable. It would still be delicious. You could still fill them. Some of that gap might go away with the maturing process in the refrigerator or freezer, though you still might run the risk of having that really fragile top. So things like packaging and all of that, you'd have to be extra careful. But still pretty edible, still, you know, something you could serve. Now, when we get to the macaronage process, that step is really something that trips up a lot of people. I started to explore this in my last video showing a swirl macaron, where I did 3 different stages of macaronage with the same batter. I did 1 portion over, mixed over macaronaged, 1 portion under, and then 1 portion perfect. So we already have, if you've seen that video, I have shown what can happen with each of those stages. Today I really want to focus and look more at what can happen if you over macaronage. So as I'm chatting here, you can see that I've added in all my sugar. I've added in some of my colorant there. I really like to add powdered colorant, especially if I'm just coloring the shells one color, to my meringue when it's about 60 to 80% of the way whipped. And I usually start out on a really low speed on my KitchenAid stand mixer. That's about a 2, 3, 4-ish. And then after the sugar is all incorporated, I like to turn it up to more like a 6. I'll explore a little bit later what could happen if you cranked it up farther than that. But for now, just know you really don't want to whip your meringue really quickly or on a high speed. So let's go back to talking about that macaronage. So with macarons, you kind of have these two basic components, right? You have the meringue, and that's why you get so many different recipes: the Italian method, the Swiss method, the French method. I'm using the French here. Whatever method you're using, you're just using egg whites and sugar in some form to create this whipped, light, frothy egg white mixture, right? The meringue that is incorporating air into this mixture. So you start out with something that is looking quite small in quantity, and you're incorporating air until it becomes much larger, much stiffer. It becomes really glossy, and it's just really increased in volume. Now, the other component is the dry ingredients, of course, the almond flour and the powdered sugar. A lot of people food process those. I usually just sift them in my home kitchen. Whatever it is, whatever kind of recipe you're using, you'll be using those ingredients. Once you get to a really stiff peak on the meringue, I really like to transfer it to another bowl just to make things easier. I like to have more space, and then I generally mix in my dry ingredients in about 3 stages. Now, this first part where we're just mixing those two building blocks together, the meringue and the dry ingredients, this isn't really the macaronage. This is not really the mixing that we're super concerned about or that is super hard yet. Just mixing these together, it's relatively simple. I mean, you don't want to go completely crazy and do any kind of insane over or under mixing, but at this point, your only goal is to get things incorporated and to make sure you don't have pockets where it's just meringue or just the dry ingredients. To be careful, it's really nice to kind of fold and be relatively gentle. And a lot of people like to do this stage in their mixer. You can add a paddle attachment and just dump everything together. It takes a little bit of practice, but it's absolutely doable. After this part, when everything is finally in the bowl, this gets really tricky and it gets a lot harder to tell because you really just have to use visualization to know when something's done. You're not measuring a temperature, you're not measuring are all my ingredients incorporated, you're not measuring anything that is super easily tangible. I think you're just looking for the ribbon stage, or to mix enough that the texture is at this appropriate texture. With this texture, what we're doing now that we have everything incorporated, so far our meringue, and as you can see here, if you look at the batter, you still see a ton of air bubbles and a lot of actually really large air bubbles in there. Even though we spend so much time and effort creating that structure and incorporating air into the meringue, the macaronage process is deflating that meringue. We're taking away, we're removing the air while we're making sure that the dry ingredients are becoming one with that sugar egg white mixture. It sounds crazy. It seems to go against your all that effort here where you really tried hard to create that perfect stiff peak, why on earth would we deflate all of that batter and take away that perfect structure? Honestly, I don't know what the first person was who made macarons and was like, let me put in all of this time to create meringue and then get rid of all my hard work. I would love to have words with them. But anyway, that it is what it is. Right here, this is the ribbon stage that we want. We want to deflate the air just enough so that when we drag the spatula through, it looks like a ribbon. It's flowing. A lot of people call it lava. A lot of people like to do figure eights or kind of move their spatula in the shape of an 8 to look, does the batter flow continuously? Can I make an 8? Can I draw an 8 with my macaron batter? Then, if you're not sure, if you're confused, if you are new to this, or even if you've done this before and you're trying to mix in a colorant, especially if you've divided your batter up into separate, colors, you're making characters or swirls or something, so you've colored them after you've added in the dry ingredients. If you're multitasking, there are so many occasions when you might accidentally overmix. But I think the primary one that new macaron makers or new bakers experience is just really being unsure. Am I done mixing or not? Is the macaronage finished? And honestly, it is just so tricky. And that is why in all of my videos, in almost all of my macaron videos, even though I usually don't include the whole process for like whipping the egg whites or all of that, I try to most of the time keep in the macaronage and the mixing process in real time, so that if you do want to bake along with me and really see what does Maddie's batter look like, what does my batter look like, you can really get as much help and assistance as you can. So if I keep mixing, the more I mix, the more fluid, the more liquid this is going to be. You can see how fast, yes, it still looks like a ribbon, but the batter is moving down so quickly. And in the bowl, if you look at the bowl, it is almost turning back into that regular pool of batter so quickly. And so that's your first hint. If you're looking at the batter falling from your spatula, you want it to take like 30 or even 60 seconds for the batter to kind of smooth out. Here at the end there, before I started piping, the batter just almost immediately went back. All of those ridges were gone. Now the next hint that your batter might be overmixed is going to come here in the piping stage. Yes, the batter looks relatively normal. The shells are looking nice. They're starting to smooth out. But for me, usually I have to tap my trays a bit to get that really nice and smooth top. And we're already seeing the macaron batter smoothing out on its own without tapping or anything like that. Also, the longer these macarons rest, they're going to just kind of pancake out. Instead of having that sort of like domed look, they're going to look really flat. They're going to spread out a lot. They're going to end up being a lot larger. And so those are some pretty good hints that maybe something is not going well. And that's because we deflated so much more air than we should have, than we wanted. Even though with the macaronage process, you're deflating things, you don't want to deflate everything. So I actually even added 2 minutes onto my baking time. You can see here the feet are huge. The top looks underbaked. They are wrinkled. And as I go here, even after they're completely cooled, I use the Silpat all the time for all of my macarons. I am having a really hard time peeling it off. The bottom is super sticky. It almost feels like these are incredibly underbaked, even though I actually overbaked them. There's something about when you over macaronage macaronage, your macarons, that they get this really wrinkly, weird top no matter how long they're in the oven. They just never seem to fully cook through. They're going to be really moist on the inside. So even though they like technically have an okay structure in there, it just doesn't form up properly. It's kind of gummy, and I think it's because there's so much air that's been removed during that macaronage process and over mixing, that instead of having this really light structure with all these air bubbles to create that perfect, almost like honeycomb kind of vibe inside, it doesn't have that. It's almost like you're baking a cake, but in little pancake discs or something. So if you are seeing your macarons looking like this, if you see that wrinkly top, if you see the really big feet, if you have sticky bottoms like you saw there on the silpat, any of that, if it feels like they're underbaked, but you know that they're not, they've been in there for the right amount of time, all of those are hints that you might be over mixing or over macaronaging your batter. So definitely take a closer look at that last stage after everything's in your bowl. What is going on? How long are you mixing? And definitely play around with mixing less. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, definitely leave them down in the comments below. I have some other amazing, I hope, tutorials and explanation videos coming your way really soon. So if you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. I'd love to see you here again. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye.